And now, your go-to source for year-round fantasy hockey advice, DFS, and betting coverage. This is NHL Fantasy on Ice, presented by Skip, the official food delivery app of the NHL.
Happy New Year. We're approaching the midway point of the fantasy hockey season, brought to you by our good friends over at Skip. It's time for another episode of NHL Fantasy on Ice, Week 13 Mailbag Edition, the first mailbag of 2025. Nick Alberga and Jake Hahn with you. Happy New Year, Jake. What's going on, buddy?
Happy New Year, Nick, to you and all of our great listeners out there. My New Year's resolution is to bring great fantasy advice, betting advice, and entertainment to everybody in 2025. And obviously, this episode is brought to you by Skip. Skip to the good part and get groceries, meals, and essentials delivered right to your door on Skip.
I would echo those sentiments. What advice would you give to New York Rangers fantasy owners right now?
I would say maybe pack it in, get ready for next year. At this point, I think that's the best advice I can give. I know maybe that's not the advice some want to hear, but I also do feel like a segment of the fan base probably right now is just tapping out, right? Like, are we calling them done? Are you ready to stick a fork in them at this point? Because their playoff percentages on a lot of places now is extremely low.
Buddy, they're on death row. It's such a precarious position because of the 3-point league. Like, we're going to get to the Montreal Canadiens. Montreal Canadiens fans are now becoming believers that they're going to make the Stanley Cup playoffs. They're so close. And now they lose Igor Shesterkin. Now it's on Jonathan Quick. But there's just so much turmoil. And we talked about it with Vancouver, but it's even worse with the New York Rangers, where every game it's like auto puck line for the other team, Jake.
It is. Like, they're not even competitive in these games. I think we talked about it on a previous episode where they're not really showing those signs of life, and they can't beat the top teams in the league. So you combine all that together and you look at, the math really not starting to work in their favor. It does look like it's a long shot for them to make the playoffs at this point. I don't know if I can get there with Montreal, Nick. We can get to that in a little bit, but what do we do with Igor Shesterkin? Like, are you in full panic mode if you're a Shesterkin owner? Is this just a little bit of a reset? Okay, he's banged up. Maybe it's good for him to go away from the team for a little bit here, get a mental and physical reset?
Well, we talked about advice. We gave you the advice about a month ago to trade away Igor Shesterkin. And for those of you who held, you had a better idea on the New York Rangers, then you're up against it. But I think the easiest thing to do right now is maybe you have a bit of faith in the New York Rangers to figure things out. Jonathan Quick's a guy, like, at least play defensive hockey is all I ask for in fantasy hockey. So internally, Jonathan Quick's the guy I would look at. Externally, a lot of pretty decent options. Like, all the talk about Cam Talbot with the Rangers reuniting with Detroit reuniting with Todd McLellan. But Alex Lyon's been the guy the last couple games. And Levi Merilainen with the Ottawa Senators has been sneaky good the first couple starts of his NHL career as well, Jake.
When in doubt, trust the Finnish goaltender that you've never heard of. That's usually the play. So I'm going to go with the guy in Ottawa there. Who knows what's going to happen with Ullmark moving forward, but maybe there's a spot for him long term. You mentioned Alex Lyon as well. I've always preferred him almost no matter where his stop is in the National Hockey League. I've really liked him. He came back from injury. It wasn't great his first couple of starts, but feels like he's starting to find it. So again, I don't really love Detroit as a team, but I do think that they can play some low scoring games. Maybe Lyon can bring you some value in fantasy hockey, and he's hanging around on most waiver wires still.
We'll say this, he is, and it's the worst time of year, I think, to lose your number one guy, especially a guy who you drafted, certainly a top 5 goalie going into this fantasy season, because it's a lot of plug and play. Like, a lot of the really good options in between the pipes are long gone. A lot of injuries once again the last couple days. Val Nichushkin dinged up for Colorado. I think next step would be Jonathan Drouin in terms of his scoop up there. Chris Letang, lower body injury on IR. Jared Spurgeon, another injury for him means Brock Faber, I think, is going to run PP1 for Minnesota. And Sam Ersson, we talked about goalies. He hasn't been able to stay healthy all season, Jake.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of a play there is with the Ersson injury, right? Because we know goaltending's just been a problem for Philly across the board, right? That team just can't get a save no matter who it is. So, I mean, if you want to plug your nose and play one of the Flyers goaltenders, you certainly could. And with Ersson going down, that does open up a little bit more of an opportunity. I'm kind of excited to see what Faber can do, though. Nick, you mentioned the Spurgeon injury going down. I mean, he's such a well-rounded defenseman. We know what he can do at both ends of the ice, but would like to see those offensive numbers come along a little bit. And he's flashed the potential to be an offensive guy from the back end if he's put in those situations. So with a little more power play time, I think Faber's a guy to keep an eye on here.
Delivered by good friends over at Skip, we head to the mailbag. First time in 2025. Is Huberdeau the real deal again? This is a very under-the-radar type story in Calgary. We brushed on it early on in the season, but he's been consistently producing what you love to see. So I'm going to go with yes. The caveat that I don't think he's going to get to that point where he's like a 110-point guy again, but I think this is more the Jonathan Huberdeau they expected in Calgary. Jake, do you agree?
I got to take the other side on this one, Nick. I'm gonna say he's not the real deal. It's been a bump up, right? And we are seeing him shoot a little bit more, score a little bit more, which is good to see. And that's never really been his game. So it's better than it was. And I mean, there was really only no way to go but up from where he was producing early on in his Calgary tenure. It's not a file that I can trust. And even though he is shooting and scoring a little bit more, is that going to continue? Is he going to revert back to 0 or 1 shot a game guy at any point? That's always going to be in the back of my mind a little bit.
I am always looking to extract value in fantasy hockey, and there's so much sprinkled in Calgary now. Have you seen Dustin Wolf's numbers on home ice? Like, he's been an epic story this season. Yep. Nazem Kadri's been consistent as of late. Connor Zary. You know, the big topic of conversation heading into the fantasy season in Calgary was Igor Sharangovich, but he's actually, struggled this year. Like, I've liked this team in general trying to find value in fantasy.
Sharangovich was probably one of the only Flames I had interest in coming into the year, right? And like you said, it hasn't really happened for him. I like the Dustin Wolf shout, though, Nick, because I feel like it's going to be way too difficult for him to get back into the Calder conversation to legitimately win it, because these top dogs at the top of the race are just having an incredible year, and it's going to be hard to chase those guys down. But what Wolf is doing in Calgary is very impressive. I think if you ask me right now what my ballot would be, he might actually be the third name on a Calder ballot.
Ooh, I like that. A little goalie love here on the podcast. This is a really good one, delivered by good friends over at Skip once again. Lane Hutson or Luke Hughes in a keeper league was another pretty good question that we got, Jake. We'll go with your answer first here, bud.
Oh, this is a really good question, actually. I got to give it to the listener on this one. I'm going to give a slight lean towards Lane Hutson here, just because I think the path, at least in the short term, to PP1 duties, I mean, he's already kind of been there, and sort of just being the guy on the back end is clearly there for Lane Hutson, right? Montreal needs somebody to step up and take over that role. Is he a little raw defensively? Yes, he needs some work in his own zone, but offensively, the numbers are there. That's what we're always looking for in fantasy hockey. And Luke Hughes might be blocked off a little bit by Dougie Hamilton here. Until he leaves, it's going to be tough for him to maybe get those front-end minutes.
See, when I got the associate producer, Phil Constantino, sifting through the questions, now we get the top questions, these top-line questions from my guy, Phil Constantino. Keep them coming, listeners. The better the questions, the better the content, Nick. Go ahead, Petey.
Yes.
Petey with the finger up. Petey, wait, whoa, time out, Petey. First time of the year here. What's going on, Petey?
What's up, guys? Happy New Year. Yeah, I'll take the stance slightly of Luke Hughes, just because I still think the Devils, like we were talking about it, that stretch they were on in December, like 8 straight games, allowing 20 shots on goal or fewer, was just ridiculous. I mean, they're one of the elite teams this year, and I still think a year, 2, 3 down the line, when it's Luke Hughes and Jack Hughes, the brothers together on Power Play 1, whenever it happens, I'm signing up for that ceiling right now. I think the Devils will probably make a cup final at least, maybe even win a title with that duo in the future.
I think in short, there's no wrong answer. Like, there's obviously a bright future ahead offensively and fantasy-wise for Luke Hughes, but for this argument, I will go with Lane Hutson as well. Everything Jake just mentioned, I'm not discrediting what you said, but more so Dougie Hamilton, they legitimately pay this guy to run their power play, and he's not going anywhere anytime soon. So I think it's going to take a bit longer for that production to come, because you just talked about it. That's the attachment you want with the Devils, is on the power play, and the first power play unit at that. And I wonder how much Luke Hughes is going to get from that. And Jake, with Lane Hutson in Montreal, like Mike Matheson, very likely to be traded between now and March 7th, the trade deadline, which opens up the door more for Lane Hutson, who's coming off a Rookie of the Month in December, right?
Right, and it might not be his last one this year. Let's just say that, right? We got a handful of months left in this season. I wouldn't be shocked if he takes home another one of those. And we've been talking about Matheson since the start of the year as a possible trade candidate at some point for Montreal, which does make a lot of sense. We had a couple of questions on Austin Matthews, Nick. I wanted to throw this one to you. Some very concerned owners out there saying, hey, I'm not in a playoff spot right now. I've got Austin Matthews. Should I just pray and hold on to him, or do I try to get a decent player? How worried are you about this injury for number 34 in Toronto?
Fantasy-wise, you should be very worried. I think there's a nice little pocket here in the next couple of weeks where you execute a trade for Austin Matthews because, again, who knows what's going on. What I'm hearing, it's not good. I think we'll find out more in the next week that they might have to shut him down again, but you just never know on these fronts. It's just really bizarre because nobody's being transparent about the situation. The fact that rest doesn't help the injury is a bit perplexing in my world. The fact that he went to Munich in November, the Four Nations is coming up. I just don't know if you're going to get the value out of Austin Matthews where you drafted him, Jake. So I think there's a lot of fantasy owners who would love to have Matthews on their team, and that's why I think you get pretty good value on the trade route. Like, this is not the first time my advice was to make a trade. I said it with Shesterkin a month ago. Again, I just don't think the value will be there in holding on to Matthews rest of season, regardless of the fact that he could probably still pop in 40 and be injured.
And on the flip side to that, there's always the other side, right? Where you get a concerned Matthews owner who's maybe sitting on the bubble in fantasy playoffs or outside of the fantasy playoffs. And if you're somebody that, maybe has the capital at the top to go make a move like that, it's obviously a risky play. I mean, he could get shut down, like you said. But hey, we're playing to win the game, and I like to roll the dice a little bit. So, if this is shorter term and he has been skating at the very least, if I make the trade for Austin Matthews and I know I'm going to get him for at least my fantasy playoffs at the end of the year, which again is not a guarantee, that's a trade I would at least be interested in maybe talking to somebody about.
I guess it depends on what you're getting back, right? I think if you're getting close to market value on a healthy Austin Matthews, then I think you pull the trigger on something like that, no doubt.
Yeah, and I don't think you just make the trade for the sake of it, right? Like, okay, I'm having a rough season. I got to shake things up. You drafted this guy top 5. I mean, he's one of the best players in the league when he's out there. Elite goal scorer. We know what he's capable of. So, I mean, that one could really hurt if you trade him for somebody that's like 3rd, 4th round value, and then all of a sudden Matthews comes back and starts doing Matthews things. You're gonna be feeling pretty rough about that one.
Big time. So we talked quite a bit about Lane Hutson throughout the early stages of this podcast. The Montreal Canadiens in general, Jake, have won 6 of 7, 3 straight on the road. They beat Tampa, Florida, the Vegas Golden Knights. And I think it'd be a good time to talk about sifting through the value of this team while they're hot. Kirby Dach has 3 goals in the last 2. Contract year, Jake Evans has 5 goals in the last 7. Laine's got 10 points in 13 outings. Lane Hutson, 13 points in 14 games. This is a cheeky little value file that you can look at right now in the Montreal Canadiens. Most importantly, they're scoring goals. They've scored 4 goals or more in 7 straight outings here, Jake.
Of all the contract years we were going to talk about this year, I did not think we'd be pumping contract year Jake Evans. But here we are. Hockey always throws us some curveballs, some surprises. That's why we love this league. And he's all of a sudden become one of the best shorthanded goal scorers in the league as well. Not sure where that came from, but I think he's got 3 shorties on the year as well. So he's kind of generating in all situations. I've kind of pumped some of these tires individually over the last few weeks, Nick. We talked about Sam Montembeault, how much he's starting. I think it's legitimate for the second half. Do I think they're going to be a playoff team? No, I would not go that far. I don't think this team is ready to make a postseason berth, but I think from a fantasy perspective, from a gaming perspective, this is a team that we can back in the second half. I think they're frisky, they're fun, they're going to give up quite a few goals as well, but like you said, the goal scoring's there. They've got some extra weapons up front. I like where this team is headed for the second half.
They had zero faith in Caden Primo, their backup, that your boy Montembeault started like 12, 13 games in a row. Now they got this kid, Jakub Dobeš, who gets a shutout at Florida in his NHL debut. And I think he could be in a prime spot to start on Friday against the lowly Blackhawks, Jake.
We love those spots. That's exactly what we're looking for in fantasy hockey. Just licking our lips, getting ready to stream him and throw him out there. I feel like every time I do that, though, he ends up giving up 4 or 5 goals, and I end up regretting it. But let's give this guy a look. He's looked good in the small sample size so far, and I just think Montreal's a team, and we're going to get into the betting segment here with Chris Meany shortly as well. A team I'm interested in backing. I am. They're going to have some rough nights still learning, still a back end that's very inexperienced and young and struggles in their own end at times, but I think we're going to get some big prices on Montreal still, and certainly a team I'm interested in backing.
Delivered by Skip. Back to the mailbag we go, Jake. Had a couple questions about Utah's crease. Connor Ingram on a conditioning stint. Kirill Vejmelka has been the man for that team since Ingram went down. How would you tackle that situation?
I like Vejmelka a lot. I liked Ingram too. And nothing wrong with Ingram, but I think this is now Vejmelka's crease, and he's somebody I'm very interested in moving forward. I guess it depends on how you feel about Utah in general, and I'd throw that at you, Nick. How do you feel about Utah in general? Like some of their other players, them actually making a playoff push. I felt like they could be that great story this year. It's been up and down. I thought it was good early, then they hit kind of a rough stretch as well. What are we thinking about Utah right now?
Well, you can't forget they lost two of their, I guess, top 5, top 4 defensemen in the first month of the season, and I think that'll play a factor moving forward. I think they're going to be on the periphery. I just don't know if they're going to get into the dance, so to speak. I'm right there with you, by the way, to answer the question on Vejmelka. It's his crease. It was his crease a couple years ago. Then Ingram stole it back last year. Now back to Vejmelka. There's something about these lefty goalies this year. We're seeing it in Washington now with Utah. It's like a theme throughout the NHL. But I think in general, as long as they're a team, not to the extent of Montreal, where I think they'd be happy to play meaningful games late in the season, I could see Utah scrapping and clawing. And don't forget, this time last year when they were in Arizona, it was the same type of conversation. They were on the door. They were knocking on that door. Can they get in? This time is the question, but I think a lot has to go right for Utah. Just more so, there's a lot of pretty good teams in the Western Conference, in my opinion.
Speaking of goalies, Nick, we got another great question. Who is the best goaltending tandem in the National Hockey League right now? If you were to have, and people like to do this in fantasy, I'm certainly one of them, where you get both goaltenders on the same team, you handcuff, you're guaranteed starts across the board. Who would be your number one choice right now in the NHL?
So if you asked me 3 weeks ago, Jake, it would have been the Toronto Maple Leafs, but Anthony Stolarz is dinged up. And the more and more I watch this Washington Capitals team, the more I'm impressed with them, man. Thompson and Lindgren have been so outstanding. Spencer Carberry has to be the front runner right now for the Jack Adams Trophy. They got Ovechkin back in the mix. So I'm going to go with them because I think they are a true tandem. I think in reality, it's probably New Jersey, but Jacob Markstrom is the number 1. Jake Allen is the number 2, in my opinion. So my answer is going to be Washington. How about you?
I know I'm always wary of trusting Jake Allen, even though we do have to give him credit. He's been a really solid backup for New Jersey this year, and I certainly trust Markstrom as the starter there. Minnesota's another one I would look at. I just think they defend so well that's a crease that I would certainly like to have both goaltenders where I'm guaranteed every start with the Minnesota Wild. I don't think you're far off with Washington, but the answer probably is Toronto when they're fully healthy. It's just they're not right now, and I don't know how much you trust the backup position after Joe Woll, but when it's Woll and Stolarz, I think that's the tandem once those guys are both healthy.
Minnesota, some love for them as well, although, again, Philip Gustafson's been the big story, and I have to credit you. That was your biggest call of 2024, Jake. You came on this podcast piping hot. You're like, I like Minnesota this year. I like Philip Gustafson. That's got to be one of your best advice pieces of the year, man.
I love collecting credit, Nick, so I appreciate that to start 2025 here, and I also appreciate you glazing over some of my not-so-great calls. We got to pump the tires here. We got to remember the good times, and Minnesota has been excellent. They hit a bump in the road. They've had some injuries, but now they got Joel Eriksson Ek back, who to me is kind of the straw that stirs the whole drink there in Minnesota. So they're kind of fully healthy up front. I think you're going to see this team go on a nice run again. And again, a team I'm probably looking to back in the betting market here moving forward.
I've got a question for Chris Meany, so we're going to get to On the Money, brought to you by Bet365. It's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 19 or older, Ontario only. Please play responsibly. If you or someone you know has concerns about gambling, visit connectsontario.ca as we welcome in the one and only Chris Meany. Means Happy New Year. My biggest question off the top, I got a plus 2,500 ticket on Kirill Kaprizov. Do I cash it right now, man?
No, you let it ride. You let it ride. Happy New Year to you and all the listeners out there. I mean, you hope that he's back here very, very soon, but you let that thing ride. Why not? I know you guys are probably sick of me talking about the Columbus Blue Jackets, but I know the listeners are not. If they've been tailing, they've been on the money. Right? The Blue Jackets, 4+ goals in 5 of 6. They're 6th in the NHL in goals. Man, I watch this team, and they're just so fun to watch. Kirill Marchenko and Sean Monahan are tied for the league lead in points over the last 2 weeks with 11. They're plus 105 for a point each at Bet365. If you want to add Dmitry Voronikov in there, who's minus 120 for just a single bet for a point. He's got 12 points in his past 8 games. If you add him to the same game parlay, it's plus 220. And our friends at Bet365 have the 30% profit boost if you have 3 legs to that parlay. And Nick, I know you like to get nuts. You love your coaching bumps. You want to add Patty Kane to that list? He's got goals in back-to-back games. That's plus 575.
I like it, and they're playing Columbus tonight, Jake. I'm hopping on Detroit in that game, 2-1 under Todd McClellan. We talked about this before their first game, but like Patrick Kane seems pretty fired up by the new coach.
I love those line stacks that Meany was talking about over at Bet365, especially with Columbus, because I still think we're getting some sleepy lines on these guys that are averaging a point per game or close to a point per game, so you can get some really juicy odds. What about the Rangers and Boston, guys? Are we going to be able to back the Rangers at one point? Is this maybe a spot on home ice? Okay, a little bit of a reset. I know Shesterkin isn't there, but when is the point where we're going to finally start to be able to back this New York Rangers team? Meany, do you have any interest in this team, or are they just a cross off your list right now?
Yeah, they're a cross off my list. I don't even see a lot of value in the betting market for some of their point props. I mean, at the start of the season, Panarin, Trocheck, and Alexis Lafreniere, those guys were automatic for me. You know, last year they were one of the best 5-5 lines in the NHL. If you want to take that trio for a point, it's plus 200. But against the Boston Bruins, you know, it's a pretty stingy team at 5-5. They've been playing much better since the coaching change. And the Rangers, Nick, they haven't shown me anything, so it's not really worth my time.
Absolute garbage. I think the one way to attack that game is probably the under. Having said that, it's kind of a bit scary, but I think that's the only way the Rangers could win, especially without Shesterkin in the mix. And I think to your point on the Rangers, like I think it's almost like an auto fade, Jake, just because of the betting market loves like those favorite sexy names, the sexy teams. They were 2 wins away from going to a Stanley Cup final. Like you almost have to auto fade the Rangers at this point.
And like Meany mentioned, we're not even getting good value tonight. Like if you're going to try to tempt me to back the Rangers, I want some big plus money at this point based on what I'm seeing. You know, they're slight underdogs on home ice, but not enough to really get me excited. One price I do like tonight, though, guys, is Colorado against the Buffalo Sabres. I'm going to lay the puck line on this one. I know Buffalo won a few games in a row, but okay, let's be real. Look at the teams that they beat. It was a part of their schedule where you could maybe win a few games. They went into Dallas the other night, lost that game, which I think most of us expected. I think more of the same in Colorado tonight. Always a difficult place to win a game, and I just think the Avs are going to be too much for the Sabres.
Yeah, it's hard to argue against Colorado, against the Buffalo Sabres for sure. And you keep an eye on Nichushkin, as you guys mentioned earlier. Terry Lehkonen has been red hot. I'll go back to the theme of lines. Like you're talking about the Rangers line. This is a line, a new formed line in Dallas that I want a piece of. I mean, Wyatt Johnson has goals in 3 straight games. Jamie Benn has 10 points in his last 10. And Matt Duchene, Nick, again, I'll throw to you. You love your revenge games against the Ottawa Senators. 33 points in 36 games. Very quiet in December. He's missing his guys, right? Tyler Seguin, Mason Marchment, sideline, but Pete DeBoer has this trio together, and in 2 games, just 2 games together, they have 4 goals, 9 points, 27 shots, and 35 shot attempts. So the Senators are playing really good hockey. They're in the middle of a 9-game road trip. I believe this is game 7 away from Ottawa. So you look at that line, plus 240 for all those guys to hit the score sheet.
Sign me up. I like that. A couple other things I'm looking at. The Utah-Calgary game. Give me Utah on the road in that game. I like the value. 4 straight losses for Utah, so I think they figured things out here. And Montreal at Chicago. I wanted to get your thoughts in general on the team. Your house account and the Montreal Canadiens. Just an important statistic to throw out there. The under 6.5, 12 of the last 13 meetings has hit with Montreal and Chicago. So I'm going to play the under in that game on Friday, Means.
You know, it's crazy. Listen to you guys talk about the Canadiens and the run that they're on. You know, they win 6 games in a row with 4+ goals. You know, the last time that they had 4+ goals in 6 straight games? That's it. It's just 4 goals. 1997.
Wow.
That's the run that this team is on. They're first in the NHL in goals for at 5-5 per 60 over the last 3 weeks, and they're second in goals against overall. I mean, wins in Tampa, in Florida, in Vegas. Clearly a letdown spot in Chicago tomorrow night, but this team is playing good. All 4 lines are playing really good, and defensively, you know, Carrier is not a guy that's, you know, turn heads in fantasy hockey, but he's just given them some stability on the right side on that blue line. So they're playing really good hockey at the moment.
Meany's jacked up about his Habs. I love to see it. And look, they're playing relatively well at the Bell Center, too. You look at the home road splits. They've been really good on home ice, or at least solid on home ice. So maybe something to look at if we can catch them as home dogs at some point here moving forward. I like the under guys in Washington, Minnesota as well. 2 teams relatively defend quite well, especially Minnesota. I think the Wild are going to try to go into Washington and play that classic road game. And the Caps are perfectly fine, kind of keeping it low scoring as well. I trust both goaltenders. under. So if you want to lay a little juice, the under 6, but if you want the plus money, the under 5.5 there. Nick?
I like it. I want a piece of that Avalanche pie just to wrap here. It means curious to get both your opinions on the potential of Nathan MacKinnon repeating as a Hart Trophy winner. Is this a fade for you guys just because of history? It hasn't happened since Ovechkin 07, 08, where somebody has gone back-to-back. But I think it should be noted the way Colorado started the year. Remember that? The first 5-6 games, everybody's like, they're cooked, they're finished, they're done. Come back from the dead. They got a goalie. They got an extension in place for Mackenzie Blackwood. He's been excellent. I think Bednar deserves some love for the Jack Adams. He's not going to win it, but Colorado Avalanche are back means, and Nathan MacKinnon's been outstanding for this team again.
Yeah, he's been fantastic. To me, he's on that same tier with Connor McDavid. A lot of people want to say McDavid and McKinnon. I don't know, how large is that gap between those two players? I think he's on that same tier. You know, if the season ended today, he would be my Hart winner. They played most of the season without Jonathan Drouin, Nichushkin again banged up, Ross Colton banged up. You know, I look at that team, and I don't think that Rantanen gets enough credit, but they are loaded with those top three guys, and you include Cale Makar in there. So I think the Avs are a really good Cup future bet at the moment because they'll probably add at the deadline. And if they're fully healthy, you know, come April, they're just going to be a team that's going to be extremely hard to stop.
Nick, if you're looking for maybe a sprinkle in the Hart Trophy, I know you're very exposed to the Hart Trophy race. You got that nice Kaprizov ticket that you brought up earlier in the show. Don't cash out, by the way. Let that puppy ride. We didn't come this far to cash out, so I want to see you ride that thing right to the end. But I think Leon Draisaitl is worth keeping an eye on. You can still find him around 10-1 in that range. I get it. McDavid's there. A lot of times they cancel each other out, but if he puts up a huge goal-scoring number and a big point number again, I think he can at least get himself back into this conversation, and we're getting some fair prices on him. So probably not for you, Nick, because you've already got some pieces, but if you haven't been exposed yet to the Hart Trophy conversation, I think Draisaitl's worth a look right now.
I've seen some books actually with McDavid as the favorite for the Hart Trophy, which I think is just so difficult. This guy's to go above and beyond to win this award, and weirdly enough, I just don't think there's any value. But Pete Jensen, you got a revenge spot for this Thursday night, bud.
I do. Evgeny Dadonov, another guy in that Dallas offense that's been on an uptick. He's actually playing on the top line with Hintz and Robertson. Maybe you could get a little spark from him in either shots on goal prop or a goal, which is available at Bet365 for plus 350. I like that number. Dadonov has multi-point games in 2 of his past 3.
Who doesn't love a little plus 350 number? P.D. Jensen out of the woods. I'm going to use my time here to look back at the start of the season and look at the Nashville Predators. And I'm at the point now where I'm like, there's got to be some regression, and I'm taking the Nashville Predators, and they're continuing to lose. I'm done with this team. I will not bet them for the rest of the way. They have been a complete disaster. Barry Trotz has to be questioned. They never score any goals. I mean, Saros, great in net. They can't even score a goal sometimes. It's that bad. Man, that team is done. I'm so done with that team. That's my time. Anything else before you put a bow on it here?
No, I think that's it. The final word of producer Bob Bender. Breaking news coming in from Bet365, where every nail-biting overtime win, breakaway, pick six, three-point shot, underdog win, buzzer beater, shootout, walk-off, and absolutely every play in between is amazing. From football to basketball and hockey to baseball, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 19 or older. Ontario only. Please play responsibly. If you're someone you know has concerns about gambling, visit connectsontario.ca.
Boy, Nick loves that read. He told me before the show, God, I love doing that Bet365 read. There's no reason to record it or have anyone else voice it. He loves doing it every single show because it's never ordinary. At Bet365, put a bow on it.
Jake, coming up on Monday, Week 14 waiver wire edition. Again, approaching the midway point of the fantasy season. Where has the time gone?
Well, Bob's right. You put the on the money in the segment on the money with that read, Nick. Absolutely on the money as always. And we figured out who's been betting the Nashville Predators. All these lines, I'm like, why are they a pick'em in Winnipeg or in Minnesota? So
right.
it's producer Bobby out there betting the Preds.
That's the thing. I think people know, but I think the professionals were betting Nashville. They're betting them those last 2 games thinking, you know what, the price is right here, and they still just can't score goals. So, I mean, just have to be done with the entire franchise for a bit. Nick, you know what you have to do before you really wrap? Give me the little read that we talked about here before the show. Give me that read. Come on.
Yeah, fade the Nashville Predators. That's my read. No, make sure to go check out episode 4 of NHL Unscripted with Adnan Virk and Jason Demers featuring rock legend Brian Slagle now up there. Check it out, Bobby.
Oh, and there's a new one out today too. It's the best of 2024, and let me tell you something. It's special. Adnan and Demers. Oh, what a special chemistry they got brewing. Okay, goodbye.
There you have it. Producer Bob Bender for Jay Kahn, Pete Jensen, and Chris Meany. I'm Nick Alberga. You've been listening to NHL Fantasy on Ice, delivered by Skip. Skip to the good part and get groceries, meals, and essentials delivered right to your door on Skip.